Hi, friends. Thank you for joining us for our October topic, FAs. This is our favorite topic to do in October because it's spooky season. And this is also a topic that causes a lot of fear and hesitation. A lot of BCBAs don't have a lot of experience in FAs, especially if you are a school-based BCBA. You're probably more likely to have ran FBAs or to have used a fast form along with some classroom observations. So we want to just take the topic and make it a little bit less scary. This is something that should require a lot of thought and care behind it. Our clients are precious. They should be protected, and we need to make sure that we have, all consent signed from all parties that will be participating in the FAs. This will be a camera off event because frankly, I'm in my pajamas. And I know that a lot of times our meetings are very relaxed because we practice that professional flexibility. And so cameras off today. Um, just relax and let's go over the information together. There are going to be quite a few activities. Overall, this should be about 3 hours between reading papers and doing the activities. Okay, let's get started. So before we get into the individual papers we'll be reading today, I would like you to take a moment to grab something to write with. You could either draw this diagram on a piece of paper, or if you want to get fancy, open up a Word document and just, import one of the little diagrams. It's up on the top bar. I just quickly, popped in a Venn diagram because we are going to read 3 different papers regarding FAs. And we want to do a little note taking to make sure that we're getting this perspective. Now, there are so many papers out there, so we're only going to go over 3. But if you're interested, please feel free to, grab more articles, share with the group, drop it into our shared Google Drive. We're all lifelong learners, and so share what you find. But these are the 3 papers that we want specifically, for today's topic. So part of the process for today will be finding the literature. Um, as future BCBAs, it is important that you not only know how to disseminate knowledge, but you also know how to find it and how to find that research. Everyone has a copy of the tool. It was a spreadsheet that I gave you where you could take papers and kind of break down, not just by author and year, because you want to look at the most current, research. But it just has all of those different boxes to fill out. For this specific assignment, you're just going to be filling out that Venn diagram, but it's a very good thing to have and to just start filling it out as you find papers that you like. So this is a classic. This is 30 years of research on the functional analysis of problem behaviors. And of course, it has our FA sweetheart, Brian Awada. So this one should be pretty easy to find. If you're not sure how to find the research, you can, of course, contact one of your supervisors, but there's 2 main ways that you should be able to do it. Google Scholar, it's great, but most of the time you can't get the full paper, and you really need the full paper for this. You can also go to the BACB website, and when you have an account, you should be able to look through their different databases to be able to find these papers. Also, if you are still in school and you haven't completed your master's yet, you can use your online library to find these. I recently lost access to mine, so I didn't pull the papers for you. I just finally reached that 6 months after completing my last class for my PhD that I no longer have access to the libraries. Um, but if you can pull it for others, that would be great as well. Please feel free to share the knowledge. If you have any trouble finding these 3 papers at all, please let us know. But this is the first one that you're going to need. And then let's look at the next. So this next paper is a little bit newer. I just think it is so important to really delve into the topic of self-injurious behaviors when we're looking at SIB. It is one of the ethical dilemmas that you might have. Which type of FA should we use when it comes to SIB? This is just such a difficult thing to witness as a practitioner, as a parent, And I can't even imagine the individuals who engage in SIB, what they are going through. I cannot really put myself into their place. But just to see the difficulties that they are having that's causing these behaviors. Of course, we want to use the gold standard to figure out what is going on so we can come up with the best interventions possible. But at the same time, we want to make sure that when we are going through and we're trying to figure out the issues, and we're trying to look at the causes and make that connection, that we're doing so in the safest manner possible, to protect our precious clients. And then last, of course, we have our Hanley paper. He has become really the expert on, PFAs. And this is what I have preferred over time. Over the last 2 years, this is my preferred method. Besides, if I'm in a school, of course, I'm doing the FBAs, the observations, the FAST. But when I'm in the clinical setting or in the home setting, PFAs are the way to go to me. So this is an important paper right now because it is so current. You can attend his trainings. They are wonderful. They have them online. You don't have to travel, all the way to Florida. You don't have to. He recently partnered with a new set of clinics. You don't have to travel or get a job there to attend one of these trainings. You can find a lot of information online about it. But this is the third article that I really want you to delve into. And so read these 3 articles. It's going to take a bit of time. We're looking at probably about at least 30 minutes per article, along with going through and filling out that diagram. So we're going to give you some time for that. At any point, you can always pause this recording. You can back it up, and there's really nothing to back up right now to go over. But at any time, you can pause the recording so you can read those papers and just kind of get the foundation about what we're talking about. Especially if you haven't experienced it before. Let's get that foundational knowledge in there, get that theoretical framework, as we go through and discuss the different types of FAs. So hopefully by now you've had a chance to review those 3 articles, kind of get that theoretical framework down, create your Venn diagram of all of the different pieces of information that you are trying to synthesize all together. But I'm going to just break it down now very simply, and bring all that information together for you now that you've had a chance to read all those articles. So first, let's start with the definition. In ABA, we love to define everything. So let's start with the definition of the FAs. So what we're looking at here is antecedents and consequences representing those in the natural environment. And you're arranging those so that their separate effects on challenging behavior can be observed and measured. This is best done in a controlled setting, of course. This can be a little bit harder to do in the school setting. Sometimes it can be harder to do in the home setting as well. So most of the time, if you go online and you look at videos, you're going to see clinical examples of FAs. Now, it does not take away from an FBA. It can be part of the assessment. However, if you are doing this in a school setting, you want to make sure that you have very specific consent forms signed for this. Now, school districts have different consent forms for doing FBAs, for even having a BCBA in the classroom observing. You want to make sure that you are being uh, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Transparent. You want to make sure that you're being very transparent about the risk and the benefits of doing an FA if you are doing an FA in the classroom. Remember that you are working with somebody's baby. Your client is somebody's child. It is somebody that they love. You're working with somebody's loved one. So you want to make sure that you are being very transparent about the process that you're doing. You want to make sure that it's very well planned and that you are the specific person that will go over the results with them. This is not something to take an independent contract for, do the FA, write up the report, and then just hand it off to someone else to explain. You are the expert in this situation. You're the one who ran the FA. You need to be the one that is sitting in that IEP, or some districts call it ARD meetings, that you are sitting in that meeting and you are going over the results and, reassuring the family of not only this is what we saw this is what we did, this is what we saw, but this is what we believe it means. And remember that even with an FA, when we're looking at functions, it's hypothetical. The only person who truly knows why they're doing what they're doing is the person that is engaging in that behavior. So it's still a hypothesis at the end of the day, and we should let parents know that this is, what we believe based upon the data. But always be willing to admit that there could be other factors that other setting events, other confounding variables that maybe we couldn't even account for. So always be willing to admit that this is something that you might need to do again if after you've done an FA, you have written the behavior intervention plan, you have implemented it with fidelity after training the staff, and then you're looking at the data. It might be something that we need to go back if we're not seeing a positive change and do again. Just please be very transparent with your families, not just about the risk and the benefits, but about the results at the end of the day. They are relying on us to be the quote unquote experts, and we want to make sure that we are doing everything we can in their power to help their loved one. Now, this is also considered the most precise and controlled way to conduct a functional assessment. That is why it's considered the gold standard, right? And even though there is kind of a map of how we do these things, it should still be individualized to the needs of the client. There is no standard FA. We have what I would consider like a template of how we would do things, but we're looking at individuals with their individual motivations and their background, their history, all of that comes together. It's all connected. So at the end of the day, it still has to be very individualized. There might be a way that you like to do things, but it still has to be individualized to that specific client. Typically, we'll have 3 to 4 test conditions. So that'll be the contingent attention, contingent escape, contingent tangible, and the alone condition. One control condition. So challenging behavior is expected to be low during this condition due to reinforcement being freely available and no demands being placed on the individual. So if they have everything that they want, everything that would make them happy, and no one is asking them to do anything that is non-preferred, that would be our controlled condition. And we would expect that behavior during this condition, because we're creating that Disney world for the client, we're creating that perfect condition for them, we would expect the behavior to be low. FAs are often also called an alternating design or multi-element design because during each session, only one type of condition manipulation is used. The next session, a different manipulation is used, and it alternates back and forth. We're going to get more into research designs and different types of experimental designs for our December meeting. But for now, just keep that in your mind, put it in your pocket. We're going to get back to that at our next meeting. Now we're going to get into the steps for each condition, how to run the FA. Now, this isn't something that I would expect for you to run alone. Of course, always go back to your supervisors for help or guidance. You should always have someone there that you can bounce any of those clinical questions off. But let's go through those steps now. So I'd like to go off on just a little tangent here, since we are talking about interfering behaviors. Oftentimes you see the terms maladaptive behavior, problem behavior, interfering behavior. What else could we use? Sometimes you'll just see it by the actual topography of what the behavior is, of course. When you see all those terms, some of them are a little bit more respectful than others. I personally prefer to say interfering behavior because all behavior is contextual. What is an appropriate behavior in one environment may not be an appropriate behavior in another environment. So what you're really looking for here are those behaviors that are serving as barriers to learning, barriers to accessing, reinforcement across environments, barriers to social engagement, barriers to making the individual's life better, right? So of course, I like to say interfering. You'll sometimes see maladaptive. I just want to make sure that whatever we're calling the behavior, we're being respectful to our clients. One thing that you will sometimes see is stimming behavior listed as an interfering behavior. And we have to remember that everybody stims. If it is not a safety issue, I say leave it alone. Um, but we all stim, we all fidget. Some of us just do it more discreetly than others. So when you're looking at those behaviors, is that stimming behavior regulation, or are we looking at something that might actually be harming the individual or harming others? So just be, very careful about that. Be thoughtful, mindful, and make sure that we're keeping those things in mind as we're trying to define the behavior. So, number one, defining the behavior. You want to make sure that that's operationally defined. Everything we do is operationally defined. Make sure that it's very clear so that no matter who is reading the definition, they understand um, what you are wanting them to observe. Most of the time, FAs have multiple people helping you run it. They might be assistants, they might be paraprofessionals, they might be teachers, they might be other BCBAs. If you're in the home, it might be one RBT and the parent. So just make sure that we are all looking at the exact same definition and that we are defining it well enough that everyone knows what we're looking for in that learning barrier / interfering behavior. You also want to identify the recording procedure used to measure the client's interfering behavior. A few months ago, we did have the topic where we looked at continuous and discontinuous measurements, what they are used for, um, different ways to do it, pros and cons of each. So I would want you to go back to that meeting and review those notes. If you are, well, I was about to say if you are going to do an FA, but actually by the time you do the FA, you're going to be a pro at this. So you're already going to know that. So make sure that you are looking at that for the activity that we have coming up in a few slides. You also want to indicate the ethical issues that may be present when conducting an FA, and you want to state how each issue will be addressed. This is very important, not just in the planning portion, but making sure that you're disclosing that to the families, disclosing that to the individual, depending upon their level of participation. Just making sure that we're looking at all of those issues, and safety is always a concern for me when it comes to SIB. I just have a lot of experience with it. And I want to make sure that everyone is staying safe and that there's no ethical issues revolving around whether we're triggering behavior and it's actually causing more harm than good to get this data to complete this FA. So all conditions are presented for at least 5 minutes on assessment day, and then you're going to have a brief 5-minute break between them. You need that break so that there is definitely a separation between conditions. You can look up FA videos online, and a lot of times you will see that there is some sort of indication whether they are wearing green hats versus red hats, or changing their shirts, or having some sort of visual signal that a new condition is starting. That's something that you might want to look into. I did look up a couple of videos, but I didn't see anything that I was comfortable with sharing. One of the things that when you're looking on YouTube for these sort of things, you want to be mindful that sometimes these videos were taken without the consent and assent of the individual that is engaging in the interfering behavior. And some of the videos are, I feel, not respectful to that individual. I don't think that there is anything more disrespectful and intrusive than videoing somebody when they're in a heightened dysregulated state. So you can look up some of those videos. You can sometimes find some class projects. I also didn't find any videos that I deemed appropriate for that either, because it was students kind of mimicking the behaviors of their clients or imaginary clients. And I don't know, it gives me an icky feeling. And if it gives you an icky feeling, then it's probably not right. But that is my feeling on it. Please feel free to look up some videos if you are curious about this. Let's see what is next. So if you're conducting an FA over multiple days, which this happens more frequently in, say, a school setting than you would in the clinical setting, then you want to make sure the order of conditions is alternated across days. You don't want it to be predictable. So for example, we have day one, attention, then we do escape demand, then alone, then play. Day two, we start with escape demand, alone, play, attention. You want to make sure that it's not the order of the conditions that's impacting the results of the FA. And you want at least 4 to 5 data points per condition so that the trends and levels of the interfering behavior across conditions can be determined. 4 to 5, I would love even more, nothing less than 3. There is this thing called baseline logic. So I've used this before I haven't used this in a clinical setting before, but I have used it in my PhD program that if we are conducting, a study, and there is behavior that we need to intervene on right away because it's dangerous, SIB or um, very extreme aggression, then we can use that baseline logic and say, okay, we are stopping this right now. We think we have the data that we need. So that is one thing to consider is that baseline logic. But 4 to 5 data points are collected per condition. That is what is ideal in the steps. And then you want to make sure that you graph the data and you're going to examine that data, because what's the point of taking the data and putting the pretty little dots all over the paper and then never looking at it again? Data should have a purpose. And so you're going to graph the data and you're going to examine it to identify the differential levels of the individual's interfering behavior across those conditions. And that should help us determine the function. So now we're going to get into the steps of the individual conditions, and there are a lot of similarities, but we just want to make sure that we're breaking down each condition for you so that you'll be comfortable, discussing this the next time that we meet and even implementing it in the future when you have the support and practice and know how to do it. So for attention, first you're going to set a 5-minute timer, and then you're going to tell the child, play with toys. Then ignore the child. Now, I know that sounds harsh, but it's not completely ignoring it like it sounds. Now, you're not giving verbal interaction, you're not giving eye contact, you're not really doing any other consistent reaction to their behavior. You're just allowing them, to play with the toys. And, you can go off and pretend to be flipping through some paperwork. Pretend to be on your computer. Of course, we are keeping an eye on the child at all times. We're also staying very close to the child just in case. Now, you're going to ignore their appropriate behavior or inappropriate behavior. That's not the target behavior. If we are looking at, let's say, spitting, if we're looking at spitting and the child is engaging in some aggressive verbal behavior while they're playing with the toys, ignore it. That is not what we're looking at all. So like it says, you could be reading a magazine, talking to another adult. If they engage in the problem behavior, then provide the attention. You can give eye contact. Say, please don't do that. We don't spit in class. We don't want you to hurt yourself, whatever it happens to be. And you can also do brief physical contact. You can move in closer, provide that attention before moving back. Now, all occurrences of the interfering behavior that you're targeting should be recorded. Now, if the frequency of the child's challenging behavior is greater in the attention condition compared to the escape, alone, and play, this provides experimental evidence that the child's problem behavior is most likely being maintained by attention. And that's what we're looking at here. We are going to look at some graphs in a moment, and they're silly graphs, but we're going to look at some graphs in a moment so you can look at what it should look like in those different conditions. And this is an accidental double slide, so we'll just move on. Just ignore this. Sorry about that. Okay, and then next, let's look at escape. And this is where you are placing that demand. You're kind of thinking that maybe the reason why the student is engaging in these behaviors is a response to a non-preferred activity being placed. So this is the condition where we're testing that out. So again, you're going to set a 5-minute timer, and you're going to present an activity or instruction to complete a task that the child has in the past, based on an interview or observational data, had difficulty in completing, even when physically guided to do so. Now, when I say physically guided, I don't mean hand over hand. I'm hoping that no one is still doing hand over hand. Um, but even when you are physically handing the student a pencil to, write on their paper, or you're handing them a crayon to color in the sheet, or the glue and the scissors to complete an art activity, more of a partial physical. Okay. You're going to wait for 5 seconds for the child to initiate a response. You want to give some wait time. So if there's no response, within that very short time frame you gave, then there's a couple of things you could do. You could repeat the instruction. Sometimes some of our kids need a little bit longer wait time, or they need that additional verbal prompt to start. You could model or demonstrate the correct response. And you can also wait 5 seconds for a response by the student, and provide one of those level 1 prompts. Now, if no response occurs after the second instruction, then you're going to repeat the instruction. Use the least amount of physical guidance possible to get them through the response, using the least amount of guidance. I'm sorry, I said that twice, but I'm very much into using the least amount of physical prompting that is required. If the child admits a correct response, prompted or unprompted, provide praise. Nice work. Great job. I like how you did that. Give that praise. If they engage in the problem behavior at any time, then immediately turn away from them for 30 seconds, with additional 30 seconds for any repeated instances of that interfering behavior. All occurrences of the child's challenging behavior are recorded. Now, again, we're looking for if the frequency of their challenging behavior during this condition is higher compared to the other conditions, then most likely we can hypothesize that the function of the behavior is escape, and it's being maintained by negative reinforcement. You're removing it. Now, it should say, and I apologize for this, up in the instructions, that you are removing the demand for a short period of time when that problem behavior occurs, because you know what? We know that we got it right. You presented the work, and immediately or with a short delay, there was some sort of interfering behavior. So go ahead and remove it, the negative reinforcement there, and indicate on the data sheet what had occurred. So next up, we have the tangible condition. You want to give the child a highly preferred toy to engage in for at least 1 minute. Now, some of our clients have shifting motivations. Some of them decide moment by moment what that highly preferred item is. There's not always like a set box of this is all the good stuff. So this might require you to do a preference assessment of some sort right before you start this condition. Now, when the timer is finished, say, my turn, and try to remove the toy. It's great if you can put your hand out and they're willing to put it into your hand. That doesn't always happen. One thing I like to do when I say my turn, when I'm teaching this, is I do like to engage in it, in whatever it is, for a little bit, as it is truly a turn when you do that, and not really give this to me, it's now mine. You're actually taking a turn. So wait 1 minute, and you want to repeat this process for 5 cycles. So you're engaging with that item for 1 minute, and you're going to do this 5 times. Now, if during the session the child starts to engage in the interfering behavior when it's not in possession of that item, you want to give it back to him and set the timer for 1 minute. No additional attention is needed right now. You don't need to provide anything else. Don't do that. Here, you can have it back. Just hand it back. You don't want to mix up assessing for attention and the tangible item at the same time. Now, most behaviors, I would say, have multiple functions. You don't normally see it just, one thing. But then again, we're only testing one condition at a time. So you want to make sure that you're not creating some sort of synthesized reinforcement by giving attention and the toy at the same time. Now, again, if the frequency of their challenging behavior is greater in the tangible condition compared to all the other conditions, then it looks like it is probably maintained, behavior is maintained by tangible reinforcement. And then finally, we have the alone condition. So the child is placed in the room alone, I'm putting that in quotation marks, without any toys or materials that would provide any sort of stimulation. Now, it's very important to note that they are not truly alone. Uh, it might be perceived as they're alone. They might believe that they're alone, but there is an adult close by just to make sure that everything is safe. We're never leaving our kids alone. They're not in a room alone. Um, I have done this where we are like behind a partition. We are right there in the room. There is an adult right at the door, but their back is turned, so it appears that they're alone. But of course, we are always near our clients to make sure that they are staying safe. And then you're going to just record the data if any challenging behavior occurs that is the target behavior that we are looking for. So during this condition, you might see more self-stimulation because there's no stimulating materials in the room. There's no attention. There's no toys. There's nothing there for them to engage in. But that is why it's the alone condition. Now, of course, if the frequency of their behavior is greater in this condition compared to the other conditions, then we are going to hypothesize that the behavior is maintained by automatic reinforcement. In a moment, you'll see some graphs of this, and you'll see what we mean. So the control condition is exactly what it sounds like. This is business as usual. So you're going to set a timer for 5 minutes, and the adult and child are in the room together with a variety of toys present. You are not placing demands at this time, but you are providing occasional attention, maybe switching out the toys. You're available. You can have that social praise. You can have that brief physical contact, the eye contact. It's all contingent on the appropriate behavior, and you want to make sure that it's happening at least once every 30 seconds. However, if any sort of interfering behavior occurs, then you are going to ignore the interfering behavior. It is business as usual. Now, we say that, but if the behavior is severe, if it is going to cause physical harm to others or to the individual, of course, you have to step in. It is what is ethically right, morally right. It is our care of duty to make sure that everybody remains safe. Again, you're recording all occurrences of the interfering behavior, and the amount of the child's interfering behavior during this condition is compared to that of the other conditions. Okay, so you're finally going to get a break from hearing me talk. I've been talking for about 35 minutes now. It is time for our next activity. So we want you to design an FA. Um, you can either, keep writing down on that piece of paper where you were comparing all of the different research articles on FA. You could get fancy, open up a Word doc, so you can upload it into your drive, have a little permanent product after this. However you want to do it. But the first step is you're going to operationally define that interfering behavior. So think carefully about a client or student or even your spouse, some sort of interfering behavior that they engage in. And I want you to operationally define that behavior to where if I read it and I was watching a video of this behavior, I would be able to pinpoint every single episode of when it occurred. That's how well we need to define it. Just pretend I have no idea who you're talking about. Most likely I won't. Especially if you choose a client that we haven't had an overlap with, or if you're choosing your spouse or your child or whoever you're designing this FA for. I want to make sure that when I read this, I understand what I'm looking for. Then I want you to identify the recording procedure that you're going to use to measure that interfering behavior. Now, think back again to that handout where we had the continuous and discontinuous measurements. Choose what you're going to use. and explain why. Give your clinical rationale on why you're going to use that measurement method to take the data. And then I want you to indicate any ethical issues that might be present when conducting this FA and state how each issue will be addressed. That part is very, very important. Anything that you can see coming up. Now, if you are using your spouse or family member as your example, take the outsider's perspective because, of course, the huge ethical issue there would be dual relationship. We're just using that individual in our brain as an example. If you're having difficulty coming up with an individual, of course, you can go online, look for a video example to give you a little bit more of a concrete structure in this, but use your imagination. You could use bullet points, you could do paragraphs. Just make sure that you do a really well-defined, FA so we can see that you understand the steps that we were walking everything through. Now we're just doing 1 through 3. We're not going to take it further than that because we don't need a video. Of course, I would never want to see a video of anyone engaging in any interfering behavior that might hurt their dignity or would violate any sort of privacy. We always want to make sure we have consent and assent. So just make sure that these first 3 steps are very well thought out, and that when we look over whatever you wrote, that we know exactly, what you had in mind when you were planning this, and that we have a good idea that you understand the material that we just went over. Now that you've finished designing your FA, please go ahead and upload that into your personal Google Drive, the one that we share, so that we can look over those. And let's start our next one. So this one's really fun for me, and I am so sorry, but I love a good themed PowerPoint. So because we are doing a spooky Halloween PowerPoint, all of our graphs are going to be Halloween themed. A plus side to this is that all these scenarios are made up. We are not looking at any identifying information on any actual client. So I hope you think this is as fun as I do because I had a lot of fun making these. So our first client is named Casper. Name might sound a little familiar to you. The behavior is going through walls, yelling boo, and chasing peers. So look at the data, look at the points. I am going to give you some time to study it, and you determine what the hypothesized function of the behavior is according to this graph. Okay, so I hope everyone said attention, and we can tell that it's attention because way up here, I mean, it is off the charts in the attention condition, and all the other conditions are way down here. Next up, we have Dracula, and the behavior is biting peers and staff to draw blood. So looking at the graph and looking at all of the data points here, you do see that demand is a little high, but the highest that we have up here is tangible. I guess we would consider this tangible and edible. Our next student goes by werewolf. Maybe I should have called him Wolfman, but his behavior is scratching himself, biting others, and howling at the moon. So check out these data points. So when we see data that looks like this, where it's all over the place, that normally points to an automatic function. So most likely the werewolf, wolfman, is engaging in these behaviors as some sort of automatic or sensory seeking function. And now we have our student Swamp Thing. He is currently refusing to clean up the swamp. He's throwing cleaning supplies. He's slinging moss and goop at staff. So let's look at the graph and see what we think the function is here. So it's not showing too many data points. I would assume that they were all at 0, and that's why we're not seeing them. But as you can tell, the demand condition is the highest, so that would be escape. We would hypothesize that the function of the behavior is escape there. So for the second half of our presentation, we just went over the gold standard FA, very traditional. Now we're going to look at all the different types that we could possibly do. The information on here is going to be much briefer because really we're building off of that original traditional FA. So some of the things are going to stay the same, and then we have some slight tweaks here and there to change things up. Now let's start with the extended and brief FAs. I probably should have color-coded this a little bit better. So for the key features, time and communication, best uses, the top portion is going to be the extended, and the bottom portion is for the brief. So for the extended, key features is that you're using repeated measures and multiple test conditions. It takes 30 hours or more. The FCT is included, but it requires lots of support and staffing to be able to run this. And best uses is if you have few constraints on your assessment. You have a lot of time. You have an environment that is, conducive to doing this. Now, for the brief, it is abbreviated sessions. It's both the number and the duration of the sessions. It's going to be a lot smaller. It's going to take 90 minutes or less, no FCT there, and you need minimal support staff. The best uses is if you have that limited assessment time. So this might be one of those instances where you are a BCBA in the school and they're like, hey, we need you to do this on a random Friday morning. And here you go, you have 2 hours. And so at that point, this is something that you might use for that. So now we're looking at the single function, alone series, and the precursor FA. So for the single, the best use for this is really if you already kind of suspect the function, you've been talking to staff, they're giving you a lot of information on their observations, so you kind of think you know what it is already, but of course you have to be sure. You have to run the single function FA. So really you're testing and controlling for only that one function to see whether or not what you're thinking is correct. For the alone, you use repeated alone sessions, and that is when you suspect automatic reinforcement. There was, oh goodness, it was years ago. It was about 2012. I do recall running this with a BCBA in my classroom, and it was a student that was engaging in high rates of SIB. And the alone condition is when it was occurring the most because it just seemed like no matter what we did with reinforcement and removing demands, really trying to make the learning environment so rich and so reinforcing, the behavior was still occurring. And so at that point, we were like, we think this is what's happening. The BCBA came to our classroom, and this is what we did. For the precursor, you want to use this for high-risk behaviors. And a lot of times, some of our, how should I say this? A lot of times you will see little behaviors occur right before the big behavior. So for instance, maybe you notice that right before a student engages in property destruction, you might notice a change in their facial expression and the way that they're holding their body. And you see some of those outward signs of what we would think of as anxiety, but of course we're looking for something measurable that we can observe. You see those, you see that precursor, behavior occur, and then the escalation occurs, you start to intervene during the precursor. And it's for those really high risk behaviors where you're like, we don't even want this to get to the peak of that pyramid in that escalation cycle. You don't want to get it to get to the peak. So that is what you would use the precursor for. So for those latency FAs, the best use for those is for those high risk behaviors. So the key feature of that one is you're going to terminate the session as soon as you get that first response. Safety is paramount. It happened. We're done. We are not going to keep pushing the envelope. We are not running this 5 times. For the trial-based FA, the assessment can actually be embedded into your already ongoing activities. You do have a limited environment control, but this is something that you might be able to do in a classroom. And finally, we're getting to PFA, what many consider the new standard. There are a lot of studies coming out about this right now, and it seems to be a much safer method than the traditional FAs. So PFA stands for Practical Functional Assessment, and it's an assessment that confirms that we have identified the reinforcers that are maintaining the interfering behaviors, as well as the conditions under which those behaviors emerge. And you might hear practical functional assessment, um, practical functional analysis. So you might hear those terms interchangeably according to whatever paper you happen to be reading. So I'm starting to lose my voice a little bit. I'm just going to leave this slide up and give you time to read it. You will also get this as part of your handout so you can review it later. Um, because after almost an hour, my voice is kind of starting to crack a little bit. So let me leave this up, take time to process it, and then we will move on to the next slide while I get a drink of water. Okay. If it didn't take you the entire minute to read that, please feel forward to jump ahead a little bit. Here's another little visual I want to give you a minute to really study and look at. Um, you'll hear me personally talk about HRE a lot, happy, relaxed, and engaged. Uh, really, that is like the optimal learning opportunity. That is the time when our clients are in their best place to learn and best place to be able to accept, transitions and removal of preferred items. And but it's all about creating that optimal learning environment. And it takes a lot of work on our part, and we want to make sure that we're building that rapport, building those relationships. But really, this is the new ABA. This is what we should all be using. It's kind. There's lots of studies coming out, so it's still scientific. Um, but really, this is the new ABA. I just can't say enough about this. And I would say more if I wasn't losing my voice right now. So please take a moment to read it, study this, and you will also get a copy of it. Okay, hopefully my voice sounds a little bit better now that I've taken a few minutes to rest it for these last few parts. So where to start on the PFA? First, you want to conduct an interview, and this is an interview with all of the important people that come into contact with the child. This could be an interview with the teachers, definitely with the family and caregivers. You just want to know everything about the behavior, when they're seeing it, how they're responding to it. before you're even getting to step in with any sort of plan intervention, what do they normally do about the behavior? But also, you want to find out what makes the child happy, what makes the child relaxed, when are they the most engaged? You're really looking for that synthesized reinforcement. Synthesized reinforcement, I'm not sure if I'm getting to it on the next slide, but synthesized reinforcement is when you take everything that you love and you just put it together. So, for instance, I'm sure many of us love coffee. I love coffee, especially iced coffee, and I love it sweet with coconut milk, and I just love a really nice iced coffee. But what I love best about iced coffee is when I'm getting to drink that iced coffee and it's from Dunkin' Donuts. I like it from Dunkin' Donuts, and I like a really large one with 3 Splendas and some kind of sugary flavor, even though I just did the 3 Splendas. Let's put a little sugar in it too. And then I really like drinking coffee on like a rainy day, and it can be a cold coffee on a rainy day. And then if I'm also getting to read a book at the same time, and I'm having my coffee and the weather is just nice and rainy and I'm reading a book and my favorite dog Blue is at my feet and my favorite cat Gary Fish Sticks is sitting in my lap and I'm just cozy and happy and I have my favorite socks on, that would be synthesized reinforcement for me. That is like my happy place, being surrounded by all of these things and conditions that I love. And we want to know, what is that for this child? So after we know this, after we know, everything surrounding the interfering behavior, but also what makes this child just in their happy place, that's when you can design and implement a context and with the child's personal reinforcers are freely available and no triggers for the problem behavior exist at that time. So they have everything that they want. They're just so happy within reason. We can't go to Disney World every day, but we create that Disney World environment right then and there in that home that is personalized and individualized to that child. And we remove all those things that are known triggers. And I'm sorry, I just need to back up just a little bit about that interview. So this is really an open interview for the parents, caregivers, teachers, siblings, babysitters, everyone in this child's life that you can possibly get the information from, because you really want a full picture. You want the background information that can even be medical information. Are they on any kind of medication? Are there any other comorbid diagnoses that we should know about? You want to know what their communication level is, because that's going to come into play when we're actually going through the PFA. Of course, the behaviors, the antecedents to those behaviors, the reinforcing context, the boundary setting that we must hold. So families have different boundaries. And I always want to make sure that when we're talking about boundaries, we also talk about arbitrary boundaries with the family. So is this a boundary related to safety and health? Sorry, I'm stumbling a little bit. Or is this an arbitrary boundary that we kind of have this boundary, but it's really not that important? And is it something that we really need to press in the moment? I'll give an example of an arbitrary boundary. Um, so I have a friend who has this boundary where her children aren't allowed to bring the iPads into the kitchen. They can use them in the living room, but iPads cannot be in the kitchen and food cannot be in the living room. Is there any leeway in that? Is that arbitrary? Is there any safety reasons we can't do that? If we really, really need to teach a skill, is it possible that we can combine those two items in a place to make it possible? Or is that such an important boundary for some reason that we need to hold it? We need to know these things. And then when I was talking about that synthesized reinforcement, that is when we get the happy, relaxed, and engaged. When we have that synthesized reinforcement, that is when we see that condition for the child, the happy, relaxed, and engaged condition. And then what are the family's overall goals? Is it just the behavior reduction? And if we do behavior reduction, there's going to have to be some sort of replacement behaviors as well, right? We still have to meet that need. But what other sort of goals do they have for this child that once we're able to decrease the interfering behaviors, these barriers to learning, that we can then turn around and target. So that kind of ends our discussion right there on the PFA. The PFA will lead into a new topic on SBT, skills-based teaching, because after we have that PFA, we know what those interfering behaviors are. We know that there are ways to make the child happy, relaxed, and engaged. And these are the conditions in which those optimal learning opportunities will present themselves. Then we can move on to that skills-based teaching and use that information to create those times where we can teach all of these wonderful skills, contextually appropriate behaviors. That's also getting into SBT, those CABs. But that is our topic for next time. So here are our resources. Some of these are directly from the slides. If there were any visuals that were taken off of anyone's website, it will be listed at the bottom. You'll see like a little thing where we got that picture from, because we want to make sure that we give credit where credit is due, right? So I will be sharing this so that you're able to watch it. And just please let us know if you have any questions. We look forward to looking over the assignments that you submit. Thank you. Bye.